Hey everybody, Joseph Rothschild here, aka Mono Bluetron, back with another episode of 10-Minute Testing. So, Halloween is just around the corner for everyone who's not a Jehovah's Witness, and as a result today we will be looking at the scariest Yu-Gi-Oh! Archetype ever printed. That would be Skull Servants, a deck that has always been pretty bad because it's lacked an ability to consistently dump 20 or 30 cards from its deck into its graveyard. However, with the frightening and spooky card Lawn Mowing Next Door, Konami has finally given this really good archetype a way to compete with today's meta. So let me jump into deck edit and show you what I'm playing, but before I do so, my girlfriend is not working today because she's sick and has patiently sat here while I record this. She would like to say hi, I guess. Here you go.
Hi everybody, happy Halloween.
Alright, let's jump into deck edit. Alright, so here's— Ah!
Joseph!
Oh my god. It's so scary. No. This is the 60 card list we've brewed up in order to make most use of Lawn Mowing Next Door as possible. Unfortunately, you can see right off the bat that Skull Servant does not actually have 60 playables, so we've also jammed the Lightsworn engine in here. We're playing Brilliant Fusion, Performance Trick Clown, Gem Knight, Garnet, and basically the bare minimum amount of Lightsworns you can play in order to, really do anything effective. Borrowing a lot of the tech from the sort of more successful Lightsworn lists that have shown up in recent weeks, and jamming a bunch of really bad Skull Servant cards in there. So let's walk through the deck. First, you got 3 of the man himself, Skull Servant, 3 King of the Skull Servants, which pretty obviously is just a Skull Servant photographed from a different angle, 3 copies of Wightmare. This card's alright, despite it having like a really old looking ass bowl cut. It's sort of a burial from the different dimension. Also really good at special summoning King of the Skull Servants if you can get him in the graveyard. We're playing 2 Lady in White. I really should be playing 3, but hilariously, space is actually tight in this deck. 3 copies of White Princess. This is a new release. This card is absurd. It is really good. If you normal or special summon it, you can send a White Prince from your deck to the graveyard, which also sends a Lady in White and a Skull Servant. So it thins your deck of the worst cards in it, and it's also triggers when you normal it or special it, so you can get it off stuff like Zombie Master. Unfortunately, it's light, which sort of plays poorly with things like Allure, but other than that, it's really good, has a normal amount of attack, and I'm excited to try it out. 2 copies of White Prince. He's not good to draw, but is good to send to the graveyard. 3 copies of Mizuki. Pretty standard in these types of Skull Servant builds. Gets back stuff like Zombie Master, which is our next card. Very good in this deck. Enables rank 4 plays. Gets these terrible Wolves and Felices and Skull Servants out of your hand. 2 copies of Armageddon Knight. Ugh, I hate this card. I could take it or leave it, but at the end of the day, we are a dark deck and we need stuff in our graveyard, so here he is. 1 copy of Plague Spreader Zombie just because we're playing Armageddon Knight. Plague Spreader might be alright. 3 copies of Wolf, 3 copies of Raiden, 3 copies of Felice, 3 copies of Lumina, 1 Lila. That's our entire Lightsworn suite. We're probably playing too many of the like Felice and Wolves, or maybe even too many Luminas, but I want redundancy because I'm aiming to mill about 20 of the cards off the top of my deck on turn 1. So getting a whole bunch of Wolves is not a big deal. 1 copy of Lila just because we need actually good target for Charge of the Light Brigade, and we really don't have the ability to play things like Twin Twisters just because, like I said, space is so tight. So this is sort of our out to things like Macro. 3 copies of Fairy Tale Snow, my favorite Lightsworn card of all time. Then we have the Trick Clown and the Garnet. I'm not playing multiples of either of these because there's 60 cards. Like, what are the chances we draw these guys? Come on. 2 copies of Solar Recharge. Probably better than Allure of Darkness, but we don't really have as many targets. 3 copies of Allure of Darkness. 3 copies of Lawn Mowing Next Door to start our turns. 1 Regeki, 1 Foolish to charge the Light Brigade. 1 Burial from a different dimension. This is like a combat trick and also like a combo enabler. It's really good in this deck. 3 copies of Brilliant Fusion. I don't need to tell you how good this card is in Lightsworn, and 1 Solemn Warning. In the extra, we have 15 cards. We got Gem Knight, Seraphonite, just our Brilliant Fusion target. A Trish, because actually we can make Trish pretty easily with this deck. Psyframe Lord Omega, a Red Dragon, Scarlight Archfiend, Mikhail, a Black Rose, a Coral Dragon, and then a bunch of rank 4s, including a Minerva, so feel free to sleeve this up and take it to locals for the low cost of $2,500, and a Crazy Hand, because routinely I would find myself with no good turn 1 play other than Minerva, and occasionally you want to barf out more than 1 rank 4 Xyz. So let's jump into the games and see what happens. Can you handle the spooky YGO Pro background? And if that's not enough, can you stomach the terrible Mound of the Bound Creator deck? We opened lawn mowing, which is great. So we're gonna mill like 30 or 40 cards off the top of our deck. In there is a Mizuki and a Zombie Master. So we'll get the Zombie Master, use the Zombie Master to get the second Mizuki, and then go into Minerva. Minerva's gonna detach Mizuki, and then use Mizuki to get back Zombie Master, and then use Zombie Master to get back King of the Skull Servants. So we also have a Plague Spreader in there. At this point, we can make a Coral Dragon. This basically represents the worst possible board we can make after lawn mowing next door. A 3,000 beater and a couple of guys who don't protect themselves aren't particularly powerful, but they're also probably good enough. This card draws us a card. We have enough resources in grave that we can probably get King of the Skull Servants back pretty easily. So, you know, aside from that, our opponent is going to use Prisma and Polymerization to go into the Shining, which actually doesn't do anything to any of my boards, so he's just going to pass back. I'm going to go ahead and Minerva, and he flips Fusion Reserve in order to get his Poly back, and I go, well, I think I actually can win this turn. Going to summon the Lady in White, basically racist at this point. She's not even wearing white. So we have a 4,000 attacking the Skull Servants who can't be affected by spells or traps. We're going to use Coral Dragon to blow up the Shining and then try and get in for lethal. He's going to flip Magic Cylinder, but oh man, it turns out that Lady in White does have text on her, so he's going to take that damage anyway, and we are going to walk away with it. So I know what you're thinking. Joseph, you're just going to show us a bunch of times that you opened the best card in your 60-card deck. Yeah, probably. We've opened Lawn Mowing Next Door again. We're going to mill a billion cards, including 2 copies of Wolf. So we're going to go ahead and special summon those, use them to go into the one, the only Minerva, and then use the Wolf that we milled in order to bring back himself as well. We've drawn into Lumina, and so we're going to use Lumina to go into our Tuner Friend, and then use the Tuner Friend to go into Psy-Frame Lord Omega. So at this point, we've got Raiden, we've got Omega, we've got Lumina, we've got Minerva. We can go into a 7-star Synchro, or even an 8-star Synchro, but I decide I'm going to banish Mizuki to summon White Princess. That's going to send White Prince to the graveyard alongside a copy of the Lady in White and also Skull Servant. Then I'm going to sink into Mikhail. And so that's my turn 1 board. This is probably one of the better Lawn Mowing Next Door boards, especially with a King of the Skull Servants in hand. So he's going to make Black Rose Dragon, try to use the effect. I'm like, okay, fine, I will chain out Psy-Frame Lord Omega, and then you can blow up everything. That's fine with me. I figure that he's kind of out of resources, so I would sort of like to gain 10,000 life points or something. I think that'd be really funny. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now, gain 2,700, put me up to 10,000, and now it's my turn. So here comes back Psy-Frame Lord Omega. We have a Solar Recharge that we've thankfully top decked a Lightsworn with, so we get to draw a bunch of cards, and at this point we can make a Skull Servant with our good friend White Prince in the graveyard, then use Mizuki in order to get Zombie Master, who will then get another Skull Servant, and then use Fairy Tale Snow. He's going to negate it. I'm like, well, I can just Fairy Tale Snow again, but he summons Speedroid Manko, and I'm like, well, okay, I'll get him next turn. I'll get him next turn. For now, we're going to Castel this card back. I want him to have as few resources as possible, and in his standby, I'm going to go ahead and add Mizuki back to grave. He's going to play Quill Pen of Gideos, not particularly good. I'm going to banish a card from his hand, and he decides to scoop. So it's important to understand that even though those last 2 games looked really good, we didn't get to really use Lawn Mowing Next Door to its full potential because our opponents were playing not 40-card decks. So the difference between milling 20 cards and milling 15 cards is actually pretty substantial in this deck, where that can represent the difference between lethal and not lethal. Anyway, our opponent this game is playing Metaphos Magispector, an actually good deck, and like every Metaphos Magispector player I've ever played, he's drawn Kieran. So we don't have Lawn Mowing Next Door, and we sort of don't have a good turn 1 play, so this might actually be a rough game for us. We're going to start off with our Allure of Darkness, and we draw into Raiden, which is okay, but not a particularly powerful turn 1, especially when we don't have anything to set. So we mill a King of the Skull Servants and a Burial, not great, and then at end step we mill 2 Wolves in a row, which is great because now the Wolves are on the field, but bad because now we can't use them to go into anything. So he's going to start off by playing Magical Abdicator and Metaphos Steelrend, start setting these Metaphos cards, and then he has a 1 and an 8, so he's going to special summon as many as possible, one of which is Kieran. He's going to put this Wolf back in my hand, which is bad because now it's completely dead. He attacks the Raiden, and I think, wait a minute, I can use White Princess's effect in order to send herself to the graveyard to set up a zombie master turn, but also to win combat. Because the way White Princess's second effect works is at spell speed 2, you can discard her, and every monster on the field loses attack and defense equal to its own level or rank times 3. And since all my monsters have like 4 or less stars and all of theirs occasionally have more, like Kieran, it means that there's some interesting combat scenarios that occur a lot, and this is one of them. So his Kieran dies, he takes a little bit of damage, and he sets a third combination, or a third counter. Interesting that he hasn't gone for a combination. Usually, you want to play that card. So, I'm doing some calculations right now, and I realize I think I have lethal. I'm going to go ahead and special summon this White Prince, send White Prince, send the 2 cards off White Prince, and then special summon a King of the Skull Servants from my deck. Now, at this point, I have a King of the Skull Servants and a Lady in White in graveyard, so he's only a 2,000. However, if I make a rank 4 with my 2 weakest monsters, named Castell specifically, I should be able to push in for lethal. So, I'm going to do that. Go ahead and send this guy back to the deck, so he's not going to be able to use these combinations, and then get in. I'm hoping these cards aren't stun traps, but since it's Metaphors, it seems pretty possible that they could just be bricks like extra combinations, and what do you know? We pick up the game. So we're back with a spooky Halloween deck list. I mean, I thought this was really good. And I mean really good in a way that's different than I usually say really good. Like, the difference between a good Girgia Karakuri list that dies to a single Solemn Strike or Quaking Mirror Force is different than the good I'm talking about here. This seems to incorporate a lot of the positive elements of 50-card Lightsworn, which I think at this point we can safely say is a meta deck, and the innate power of cards like White Princess. This card was absolutely absurd. The fact that it represents an honest in your hand, or at least a pseudo-honest type effect, and also has the ability to be brought back with Zombie Master, Mizuki, things like that, in order to send White Prince, send a couple of Skull Servants from your deck, and then get a King of the Skull Servants, seems like a really sweet advantage engine. If there's anything I would change, I would probably try and find room for Twin Twisters. It really felt like there were a lot of cards I would have no problem discarding to that at any point in time, but I don't know what on earth I would take out. The second thing I'd probably try and do is bump up to 3 Lady in White, just so that we have the ability to use White Prince as much as possible, but maybe the other answer is to, at the very least, equalize the amount of Lady in Whites and Skull Servants I'm playing. I might put them both to 2. Whatever the case, I'll be exploring it on stream in the next couple of days, and if Skull Servants is a deck that tickles your fancy and puts you in the Halloween spirit, feel free to try it out. I had a lot of fun, and I'm sure you will too. So that's that. I hope you enjoyed my jump scare. I figured all the cool YouTubers are doing it nowadays. I might as well jump on board. I hope you enjoyed the scariest deck since Gimmick Puppet. And most of all, I hope you just enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure to give me a like, a comment, or a subscribe. It really helps me out. And if you want to see me play the decks I make on this show on stream, I'm live on Twitch every Tuesday and Thursday from 9:30 a.m. to noon Eastern Standard Time. Link is in the description. And finally, if there is any deck or archetype you want me to explore on a future episode of this show, let me know in the comments below and I will do my best to accommodate you. Otherwise, I will see you on Wednesday.